Okay, thank you for coming. Can I get a sense of who you are? Can I see a show of hands for people who write code as some part of what you do? Okay. Front end and visual design. Okay, a lot of you, welcome. User research, user testing. There you are. Hi. Well, I'm delighted to be able to talk with all of you, and I suspect that just from that show of hands that this is an opportunity for Shari and I to talk with you about something that you may have heard about in a different way than how we think about and talk about this stuff. So if you have questions, please write them down and sit on them until the end, and then we'd love to answer your questions. We're going to try to leave as much room for that as possible. I came from Michigan to speak with you today. I have a company called the Understanding Group. You can call us TUG, and information architecture is all that we do. Shari is the founder of her own company as well, and they do search engine marketing, search engine optimization, information architecture work, all kinds of marvelous things. They're in Chicago. And both of us have the pleasure to serve on the board of what's now, I think we could say, a sister organization with the UXPA. This conference, I believe this is the first year that UXPA has honored a discount for the members of the Information Architecture Institute, and it's the same one that you give your own members. So thank you for that. And if you're interested in information architecture, if some of the stuff that Shari and I talk about today fascinates you or enrages you or makes you need to do something, this is a good place to start doing things about information architecture. And you can go to it, and the intention of the Institute is also to come to you. And some of you may have heard about a new thing that started 2 years ago called World Information Architecture Day. We've kind of copied what many of you do with World Usability Day. Our thing is we add an official location each year. And when we started it, it was 14 locations to commemorate the 14th anniversary of the publication of this book. How many of you have seen this? Keep your hands up if you own this. Okay, great. So pretty familiar, right? An O'Reilly book about information architecture for the World Wide Web. So this is now 16 years old, I believe, or next year when we have the next World Information Architecture Day. There will be 16 of those locations. And this is an important book to many of us who practice information architecture. And when this book came out in 1998, it was talking about information architecture for the World Wide Web. And the web was pretty new at that point, but information architecture was not new at that point. Information architecture is an idea that's been around for quite a long time. It goes back to the 1960s. And when Peter Morville and Lou Rosenfeld decided to call what they were doing as librarians, sort of the organizing of information on large-scale websites, they decided to call what they were doing information architecture. And this sense of information architecture is a common way, or has served the purpose of being kind of a common way to understand what it is and how to talk about it. But this book was published last, so this is a picture of the 3rd edition. This came out in 2007. As far as Peter and Lou have told me, they don't intend to issue another one of these. And many of us who teach information architecture, who have used this book in the classroom, have found it to be increasingly less comprehensive to talk about what information architecture is about today. And so in the gap between 2007, the last time that we had this packet of teachings about information architecture, and today, what's different? In 2008, or 2007, when they wrote the last edition of the Polar Bear book, and I think especially if you went back to 1998, when the first edition of the Polar Bear book came out, if you were to ask a political scientist, where are the places where the most important things in human culture are happening, they would tell you a list of cities or regions. But today, if you ask any political scientist, where are the important things in human culture happening, or if you specifically ask, where did the Arab Spring happen? That happened in a place made of information. It happened on Facebook. It happened on Twitter. And so in 1998, or even in 2007, to talk about places made of information, you may have been talking about that in kind of a metaphorical way. But today's sense of information architecture is really talking about places made of information and using the approaches of what architects do in physical space to deal with how we live now. The types of experiences and services that people want. Just like buildings, this weird hotel building was designed and architected to accommodate specific activities, lots of different kinds of activities. And it's really hard and expensive to make a building accommodate all those human functions. They're complex. There's contradictions in what you need to do. The same is now true of these digital places. They're so complex. There are so many seeming contradictions with what people want to accomplish in these places that using the approaches of architecture, the way that we order physical space to do the stuff that people want, those are some of the more contemporary approaches to information architecture. And I'd love to tell you about those, but whether we're talking about sort of this newer sense of places made of information architecture, or if we were back in 1998 talking about this brand new technology of the World Wide Web and what we're going to do about it, there is sort of an undergirding to all of this information architecture stuff. And this is one way of talking about it. I love the way that Jorge said this. At the IA Summit not too long ago, in Baltimore, a couple months ago, he said that information architecture is the only field I'm aware of that's concerned with the structural integrity of meaning across contexts. And with that definition, you know, a lot of you may have worked in contexts, or you may even be one such person for whom the sense of information architecture is, oh, those are the people who are making the sitemap, or doing the navigation. But that sensibility, really what's underneath all of it is the desire to have meaning, to have a meaningful way to understand in these places made of information. So I would like to show you a model for understanding information architecture. And this model, I hope, describes all of it. If you are talking about information architecture, or if the products and services that you're working on, if you are concerned about making sure that the structures of these places made of information that we're all working on, if you want to apply this sort of information architectural thinking, my contention is that you can use this model to do it, and also sort of heuristically to evaluate websites to say, well, what is the information architecture of this thing? Websites, applications, digital products of any sort, sort of using this to dig into and understand what, and break apart, what is the information architecture part of this thing that we're working on? So I believe that this is a model that describes that, and I'll briefly walk you through it. The first piece, and when I was in high school, I worked in a bike shop, and I learned the sort of counterintuitive thing about gears, is that the gears, a system, so the gear system of a bike, it's the little gears that do most of the hardest work, and the little gears, getting the little gears right is the most important part. If the little gear is wrong for the system you want to make, the additional gears that you add don't really matter. So the little gear here is ontology. Our particular meaning, the dictionary definition of ontology is sort of the science of meaning. And I like to, one of the ways that you can talk about this is what we mean, so whatever your we is, what we mean when we say what we say. That's ontology. And this is important stuff. It is the bedrock of being able to make places out of information that are understandable and that work. Because language is so subjective. It is so slippery. And the sense, so what is the ontology of cheap? This bookstore, if it wanted to have a great service experience for its customers, amplifying the sense of cheap that is good is important for their business. And if they get this wrong, it sends the exact opposite message that they want potential customers to know. Cheap, but not cheap. We can do all of this nuance in person because we have so many ways to express this meaning, but how do you capture and express these kinds of meanings structurally in information systems? A lot of us, and the companies that we work for, pay companies to give us pre-built ontologies, and this is fantastic. If you're trying to, if you go back to what Jorge said, information architecture is the structural integrity of meaning across all sorts of different contexts. If you want orange to always be a certain orange, so what do we mean when we say what we say? If this is our orange, we can pay Pantone to provide an ontology of what orange means that we can rely on across devices, contexts, print, screen. This is an ontology, and they get paid well to control the meaning of this and to allow us to harness that meaning. Does anybody know what this is? You already knew. Capybara, yes. This is an animal which is plentiful, overly plentiful in many places of Central America and South America. According to the ontology of the Catholic Church, this is a fish. And before you laugh, this is a humane changing of the meaning. So the Catholic Church's decision to change, to tweak the ontology of the animal kingdom was because the people who live in the places where this animal lives, if they're believers in this religion, they can't eat meat on Fridays. They can eat fish. And if they weren't able to eat these on Fridays, many of them would starve, or at least it would be unhealthy. So by changing the meaning of what this is, so us Catholics, I'm not one, but if I was one, us Catholics in certain geographic areas, what we mean when we say what we say is incredibly powerful and is the difference between being healthy or not for people. So this is important stuff, and this is information architecture. What is the meaning of App Store? This causes me endless distress. On my Macintosh, in iTunes, there is something called App Store. But then there's also the App Store, right? There's another thing called App Store on my Mac. There are two different things. Oops, getting ahead of myself. It gets worse. What do we mean, Apple, when we say App Store? Oh, we mean two different things. One of them is apps for your iOS devices, and one of them is apps for your Macintosh. Okay, what is the meaning of iTunes? For those of you who are old enough to have been present for the birth of the first iPods and the 1.0 version of iTunes, it was a media player. But until the very last, and actually iOS 7 isn't out yet, so this is still broken today. On your iPhone, iTunes is what? It's a store. It doesn't play music. What do we mean when we say iTunes? Here, iTunes is a thing that plays music and movies and TV shows and does all this junk and has an app store in it. But over here, when you tap the button that says iTunes, you click on something over here that says iTunes, it's this. You click on something over here, tap on something, it's a mess. It makes this a really bad product. This is one of the worst digital experiences you'll ever have on your computer is the iTunes ecosystem. And the reason it is broken is because of the ontology. They don't get this at all. So here, iTunes, and then there's a button that says music to make the thing do what iTunes everywhere else that you know of it does. They fixed this now with one little tweak, and this illustrates the difference between ontology and taxonomy. Taxonomy is my next point. They are now calling it iTunes Store on the iOS device, which is it's better, but it's still broken. So taxonomy, the labels, so you could say, well, this labeling system here, and taxonomy is probably something you all think of as being more information architecture at the core. So there's a taxonomy of labels here. But what is the ontology of what we mean by these things? The interrelation of taxonomy and ontology gets tricky. To say, is this an ontology problem or a taxonomy problem? We have addressed this in iOS 7 as a taxonomy change. We have not fixed the underlying broken, all that junk in the basement. When we say iTunes, it's still all, and when we say App Store, these are all still broken. So we're addressing it through taxonomy. Ontology is our particular meaning, and then taxonomy is our arrangement of that meaning, sort of the application of that meaning in a context. So taxonomy, something that's a little more familiar maybe, a representation of a system of words, the arrangement of the words of our meaning. That's the taxonomy. And taxonomies can be arranged in different contexts to create all sorts of different kinds of meaning, which is great. So for Zingerman's, a online retailer in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they have a category called breads, and they have a category called sweets. And one of the links in each of these menus goes to the same place, sweet specialty breads. Because we have this context, and in their physical store, they have a really different way of organizing these labels to make meaning. But here, through poly-hierarchy and things, they have made a taxonomy to support their meaning. So arranging meaning in context, that's important. How about arranging meaning across contexts? Not too long ago, Target had a special thing they were doing with Andy Warhol-themed soup cans, Campbell soup cans, that I read about on the New York Times. So I did a Google search for Warhol soup cans, Target. Target had one of these crappy search ads that just scoops up whatever I searched for and then runs a search on their site. And their site doesn't know anything about Andy Warhol soup cans, even though their PR firm spent all sorts of things, probably amazing things, to get this placement. So the arrangement of this meaning across contexts was broken. And then the last piece, choreography. You can already see the way that the relationship between these systems of labels and meaning start to set up sort of a dance. This is still broken. On the Apple platform, over here in iTunes, there are books. I could click on this all day long and it would never show me this beautiful digital book of Yellow Submarine because iBooks only exist on the iOS device. So the choreography, how do I do this dance? Oh, well, I buy it and load it here, and then I plug in my cord, and then I can do the stuff. This choreography, this dance, is terrible. This is another sense of choreography, which again, closer to what you may expect from information architecture. And then this other sense of what we do with this choreography. Is the unfolding of this meaning appropriate? Here for the Hyatt Regency, before I get to spending $1,026 for my hotel room for a conference, there's a button here that says, show me my custom upgrade. This takes me totally out of context and tries to sell me on some sort of other program that will cause me to not check out. Well, that is not the appropriate unfolding. Here at a concert sort of ticket website, after the transaction, yeah, then you can say continue for this offer. But this sense of what is the appropriate choreography, and you can see this all over any website, just asking these questions. What is our particular meaning? What do we mean by card? For Starbucks, gift card and loyalty card is the same thing. That's not true everywhere. Arrangements of the parts. Why is there a shop? What Starbucks have you been to where only 1/6 of where customers are is where commerce happens, but they've got their store cordoned off in a little corner here. And then rules for how do these parts get together. If we have a page for the tribute blend in the shop and another page for it in the coffee menu, that's a weird dance. I have to go to the same thing twice. So that's a model for understanding information architecture, and now Shari will tell you about the ways that information architecture applies in her world. And we're going to do a mic switch. So,
we're going to dance.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Ooh. So, Shari, that's my name. Board of Directors, Information Architecture Institute, UXPA. We're going to play a game with words. What do you think of when you think of search? Really? Do you know what I think of? This evil SEO? I think of Sherlock Holmes. I'm a nerd. Okay, I've asked other people, what do you think of when you think of search? And if they're looking for something, they're thinking of a map. I need to find where I'm looking for. But you all said Google. None of you said this, which I think is funny. But all of these are search. What I think is hilarious is search loc.gov. Now, if you're a nerd like Shari, and if you have a library card like Dan, who I'm insanely jealous about, who knows what loc.gov is? Library of Congress. What if you don't live in the United States? What does LOC mean? And also, this is prompt text. Do you know what happens when you put prompt text in a text box? Eye tracking studies show this. People are less likely to search. In fact, most people, if you look at your query logs, they just click the go button and you find that your prompt text is the most searched for keyword phrase in your site search. I think this was interesting because LexisNexis is a search engine, and again, your eyes, eye tracking shows this over and over again. It's 30 characters, it's great, but what if I took context out of this? What if I took LexisNexis out of this? This looks like a product sign-in. So people don't do search right, and that's web search. This is software search. Search has become relegated to a failure of navigation. And Dan was making fun of me this week because he said I should trademark this phrase. I said, people search, get over it. And they do, and they search a lot. They're not very good at it, but people do search. Well, everything that Dan talked about that affects information architecture affects site search. It affects web search. That entire ontology, the labeling system, and the choreography affects not only how your pages rank in web search engines, but also how your documents rank in a site search engine, as well as any kind of database that you do. So everything, all that stuff affects search. And some of these labels are terrible, like GPU. I live in Photoshop. I have no idea what GPU means. And Graphultopia. I use OmniGraffle all the time for my wireframes, and I still don't know what Graphultopia is, and I don't care. So when I think of the user experience, I am a very big Peter Morville fan, so I follow his facets of user experience. And you cannot use what you cannot find. So my area that I like to focus on is findability, and this is from his search patterns book, and this URL, this is where he originally posted it on the web. And again, the area that I tend to focus on is search. And when people look for information, they don't just type things into a search engine. They browse search results. We're talking about, Dan was talking about Facebook and talking about Twitter as being information environments. People ask their communities in these information environments. So how you label things and how the order in which you place your labels actually affects whether things rank or not. So as a search engine optimizer, I get this all the time. SEO is optimizing a website, optimizing an intranet, optimizing documents for search engines. Is that true or false? Or is it partially true? Well, if that were true on a website, this is a type of web page that would rank and would kick butt on the search engines. And I am a developer. I can make this look hot. I can make this look exactly like Facebook if I wanted to. But this is not what search engines want, and the reason that search engines, as I've anthropomorphized it, they don't want is because searchers don't want it. And they actually work very hard to prevent this type of document from appearing in search results. And believe it or not, as a search engine optimizer, I do that all the time, try to prevent these things from getting into search results. So search engine optimization is not actually optimizing for search engines, it's optimizing for people who use search engines. Because the fact is, Google's not going to add to cart. Google's not going to type in keywords. Humans are. So whenever I design any kind of interface, I'm working on a dashboard right now, I always think people first, but accommodate technology, because you do have two different users. So you have to accommodate technology. And it drives me insane as the search person to see usability people take important words and labels off the page. And I don't even want to tell you what I think of technology people sometimes, but we need more technology people to understand user-centered design. And search engine optimization is not magic fairy dust. One of the worst things you can do is to say, here's my interface, now I'm going to hand it over to an optimizer. Or it's a technology problem, I'm going to hand it over to the tech team. You know, the tech team is probably the group that came up with Apple's ontology, okay? Really. So you need to get a search expert in long before an interface is developed. So this has a long-term effect on your site. So we have to think about SEO as optimizing for people. And the things we do is we organize content to make things easy to find, and we label content to make it easy to find. But we also try to ensure that search engines don't have access to undesirable content. Examples of undesirable content, duplicate content. You want to know what's a nightmare for search engines? Faceted classification. You got a site search engine, you need to block that site search engine results pages from other types of technology, because to them it's duplicate content. And that just requires planning. And if you've planned way ahead of time, you can name your filing system in a way that it's easy to block technology from accessing that area. But if you don't plan ahead of time, it's going to be very difficult to ensure that you can block that extra content. So it applies to web search engines, it applies to site search engines, it applies to software, and it applies to all these different devices. So I call them humans, human users, and non-human users. A balance of user-centered and technology-centered design. Now, these are 4 building blocks that I came up with a long time ago, and I added searcher goals rather recently because it's pretty clear that it's going to stick around. Keywords and labels. Are you using the words and phrases that people type into search engines? Are you using them appropriately? Are you using the right language? Spanish is not the same in Mexico, Central America, and Spain, as is Canadian French and France French. And I've usability tested the United States, Canadian English speakers, and British English speakers. And just to merely change a word from apartment to flat is not enough. They actually architect and label and have different contexts than we do. Something happened at World IA Day, really funny thing. A gentleman hired, in Canada, Ottawa, Canada, hired a woman from Mobile, Alabama for his social media director, and he called her a Yankee. I know, and I said this in Nashville, and the whole audience went, and I jumped in my chair, and she goes, I know he called me a Yankee, and I know, and he goes, what did I do? How would he know? He's Canadian. He's not from the United States, so he didn't have the right context. So labeling her Yankee, bad. Shari's a Yankee, that's okay. Architecture and design, how are you structuring everything? How are you providing information sent? How are you laying things out on a page? Because how you lay things out on a page affects how pages and documents will rank. Link development and social signals more important now than they were before, and searchers do have very specific goals. When we talk about keywords and labels, I'm talking about document labels. This title tag on a web page is a document label. This could wreak havoc if you have duplicate titles, because then Google, Yahoo, Bing, your site search engine or a software search engine, which one is the right document? So your title is usually heavily weighted in many, many search engines. This is the main content area. These are navigation labels. This is the main content area. There's breadcrumb links providing a sense of place, headings, subheadings, and they're reinforced. So even though, I don't know how you were taught, but the way I was taught is redundancy is bad. You know, I get a little red mark in my English class, but sometimes a little bit of repetition, it just reinforces a sense of place, and it also reinforces information sent. And then there's architecture, design, and layout. And this is something that even the top search engine optimizers in the world don't realize, that search engines consider the way they're programmed right now is what you put first is what you think is most important. Not just in content, but also in navigation. So definition is more important than symptoms. Symptoms is more important than causes, blah, 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 blah. But this is the natural order that people do things on medical sites. My background's in medical genetics. And then just recently, Dan knows this, my mom just beat cancer. She was found cancer-free just 2 weeks ago. And this is the exact order that patients look for things. And these are really good labels. One of the reasons I show Mayo Clinic is one of the best architected sites on the web. Keywords and labels, architecture and design are called on-the-page criteria because these are something that you, as a website owner, supposedly have control over. Off-the-page criteria is something that you don't completely have control over. You don't have complete control over how other websites or other documents link to you. That would be under architecture. You don't have complete control of what people say in their social circles. And you don't control searcher goals. That's on the other end. And when on-the-page criteria and off-the-page criteria reinforce each other, that's when you have a search engine-friendly interface. And the way I like to think about this when I'm teaching at a university is I think keywords and labels teach me aboutness. What is the author's intent? What is this document about? When I'm talking about architecture and design, I'm looking at infrastructure and information sent. And I love that Dan put choreography because I had my knee replaced last year and I named him Larry. So this is Larry. The other one's going to be named Mo when I get him replaced. And a lot of people, when they build a website or they build an interface, especially if you're on the design team, you always want your interface to be the face, that the first thing that people see and that people think it's great, they think it's cool, and they think they love it. Well, sometimes the purpose of a document isn't to be the face. Sometimes the purpose of a document is to be a knee. What happens when your knee doesn't work? Can you dance? Can you walk? There are things on websites that you might not think are hugely important, like a site index or a sitemap, that are hugely important not only to users, but also to search engines. They provide a sense of place and they provide information sent. So we need to have these. Validation and credibility. Do other people, objective third-party resources, not these crazy frickin' link farm people, say similar, same things, or add to what you say about your own documents? And are you accommodating known searcher goals? So what are known searcher goals? These have been known since the mid to late 90s. Navigational, where can I go? Informational, what can I learn? What can I know? Transactional, what can I do? If you can remember go, know, do, you got web searcher behavior. And then I'm going to give you an SEO certificate because you know more than 90% of the SEOs on the planet. Navigational, where can I go? It's usually for something that you know already exists. So either you know it exists and you're going to go there for the first time, or you know it exists and you're a return visitor. Navigational queries are far more common than people think. I'm on a board of advisors at Bing, and 33% of web queries for desktop and notebook computers are navigational, and it's even higher for mobile phones or mobile devices. And you can tell when a keyword is navigational because you see the appearance of web links. They're called site links in Google, web links in Bing. The reason that Google, Yahoo, Bing, and all these other search engines try really, really hard to have what a navigational intent to be in the number 1, number 2, or number 3 position is, that people rarely will click or look past positions 1, 2, or 3. That's why you see the appearance of site links. So they're very unlikely to scroll, they're very unlikely to look. So if I type in National Cancer Institute, or if I type in NCI, and you see these things here in your head, you got to go navigational query. So first thing you got to do with any of your interfaces is do navigational queries. Make sure you're satisfying them, because people will not look farther than those first few positions. So this is a navigational query. How can you tell this is a navigational query? There's something so blazingly obvious that makes this a navigational query. The .com. .com, .edu, .gov, all are part of a URL is an indication of a navigational query. So if you look at your log files and you see people typing in parts of a URL, that's good. Make sure you're getting them to the right place. But let's say you clicked on this, okay? Have you ever done your usability testers? Have you done the expectancy test? What do you expect when you click on this link? FAQs, what is that abbreviation for? Frequently asked questions. So most people say, I expect to see question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. This is a page we used to get. And the response, the number 1 response I get to all usability tests is that. And that was frickin' hilarious. And that's why I prefer to be the observer rather than the facilitator in a usability test, because people are funny. There are no questions, there are no answers, and there isn't even a link to be found for the FAQs. So United has since fixed that, I will say that, so it is better. But this usability test was just so funny, I had to show it to you. So, do you ever see that face? When you do it, I love to videotape in usability tests, because the more I hear click, 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 or if it's a phone, like, you know, it's not the user making the error, it's the interface that's making the error, or even the device. And I look for that face. I look for that crinkled, furrowed brow, and then sometimes people just swear underneath their breath. And I've heard more people swear in usability than I have in any other field, so I think it's great. So most common type of search engine query is an informational query. Sometimes it's an exploratory search, sometimes it's not. Answer to a question, number 1. Quick fact, reviews, and a list. Can you tell me a page that's naturally a list? Category page, subcategory page. So you would optimize a list for the plural form of a word rather than the singular form of a word. Of course, notable exceptions would be things like shoes. You can tell that things are informational in nature if you ever see Wikipedia appear in the top search results, because Wikipedia satisfies informational queries, and search engines are trying to answer informational queries directly in the search results. Transactional queries, least common, around 10 to 26%, 10 to 24%. Informational queries are around 60 to 80% of search engine queries. Transactional queries, download, listen to music, look at pictures, watch video. So if you see people type in the word image or picture, that's why you see Google, Yahoo, Bing, and search engines deliver exactly what people want at the top of the page. And also, if you notice, look at this is what's called term highlighting. The word picture, photo is also highlighted, so they're looking at the semantic web, and it's not where it needs to be now, but it is getting better and better. Search engine optimization professionals don't only want Google rankings. We also want, if somebody's doing a search for thyroid cancer symptoms, are they getting the right page? They probably want a symptoms page, but the second best would be the actual thyroid cancer homepage. So Cancer Institute does a pretty decent job. So mobile queries, most common query types are quick fact, location, personal information. What kind of query is a quick fact? It's an informational query. Location, where am I? That's a combination of informational and transactional. Personal information, I want to check my email. I want to check my frequent flyer miles. Is that navigational, informational, or transactional? It's actually navigational. You can't check your email and you can't check your frequent flyer miles until you log in first. So you have to go to a specific page or a specific destination before you can do your personal information. So navigational, informational, and transactional queries are things you actually have to accommodate as part of information architecture. And if you got your taxonomy right, your labeling system right, and you do the dance right, your site search engine is going to be pretty accurate, and it's also going to rank. But that's if you can do the dance right, and you are smart and you get your knee replaced when your doctor tells you to. Now, the things that some people have a tough time swallowing is that everybody has a search responsibility. It's not something that you hand off to your tech team and say, you deal with this. It's a metadata problem. It's a meta tag problem. Content people need to learn how to write in a different way. It's a different way of writing, and it's been this way for a very long time. That includes journalists and PR people who are usually uncomfortable with that. With a search engine, the home page is not the most desirable point of entry. The most desirable point of entry is to go directly to the page that people want. We call it teleporting. For those of you who are nerds like me, that's Worm from X-Men, or Beam Me Up Scotty, that's teleporting, going from this place to this place without having to browse. And you do have to accommodate searching as well as browsing behaviors, and some of your solutions can actually hurt search engine visibility. Faceted classification causes nightmares with search engines. Tagging does the same thing. Personalization causes duplicate content. So bring in a search person as early as possible. And, you know, I'm not afraid to butt heads with technical people or content people or anybody, just because I'm me. But everybody has a findability responsibility. Everybody has their role to play, but if everybody played that role and everybody did that dance, people will be able to find their desired content. So that's what I had to say. If you need to know about navigational, informational, and transactional queries, I wrote it in here. For those of you who are technical people, his name is Andre Broder, A-N-D-R-E-I, Broder, B as in boy, O-R-R-O-D as in dog, E-R. The building blocks of SEO, the first three, are in that book. Even though it's an old book, some things just don't change. So we have time for questions, and thank you all. You want to get out of this?
Objections?
SEOs are evil. Some of them are. Sure. And back.
He was first. Sure.
Dan?
I really like your conspiracy theory, but I believe that it is. Here's my theory. I disagree with Shari's. I don't think it's the technical people. I believe it's because the way that Apple tends to approach product design is by refining a series of pictures of what something looks like until the pictures are right. And the complexity of iTunes, when it only had to do music stuff, it's arguable that you didn't need to have an architectural approach to that. That by just designing the surface of that music player product, that it could have been good, and I think it was good. But as soon as the complexity was added of, oh, now we rent movies, oh, now we have TV, now we have books, now we have App Store, you have to architect that in order for this digital place to accommodate all those complex and contradictory functions, and they were already locked into a marketing decision about, no, it's iTunes. Steve likes the label iTunes. He doesn't mind that iTunes shows pictures and tune, and so I think it's all Steve Jobs' fault, but we'll never know.
I was teasing about the technical people. I just like to pick on them.
Yes, maybe this is one.
No, although I used to work at Apple, since this was in the computer era, not the music and phone era. Shari, you mentioned about the facets being harmful or whatever to search engine optimization. Can you give us a little more detail about exactly what we would do to eliminate that issue?
Yeah, it's not that difficult. It really isn't. But it means you have to come up with a really good labeling and archiving system. So the problem with faceted classification is that it's sorting gone wild. You're producing document upon document after document. So I think Peter Morville did wine.com, and it had, I forget how many facets, but it ended up generating 19 million to 20 million unique URLs, just with sorted content. So what we do as information architects and usability professionals is find the three main ways that people organize and label content. And we use usability tests, we use search data, we do use keyword research tools, and advertising data from the marketing department, and we really determine how people organize and label content, and we present that to technology so that aboutness is clear. Because if you only make one path to content, that actually makes things less findable because you're siloing it. But people usually find content. Dan and I were doing this. We were putting our presentations all into one, and we did the same thing, we just did it in different ways. So there were multiple paths, but we limited it to the main ways that users generally use it. So if you set up a labeling system that you can filter out in the programming language, don't do anything. So I'm just going to use search results. So let's say I have a site search engine. I will create a folder that goes, example.com/search, and I will tell all search engines, don't index any of these URLs in search results, because it's just sorting gone wild. And what happens is that leaves room for the right pages, the right documents to rank. So just find the ways, the main ways that people organize, and include the wayfinders in there, and give it to them. And you'd be surprised how accurate your search results are.
So you're saying sort of focus where the search results will come, right?
Focus on the main way people find content via browsing, asking, and querying all together. And that includes usability tests. It includes the card sorting tests. And a lot of times I see people organize things by type, when in fact they organize by location first. So a lot of people who do local websites, they see typed into search, they do the keyword research data, and they see like restaurants. Well, you don't go to a restaurant until you're there. So restaurants should actually be organized not by type first. They should be organized by location. But SEO people will get mixed up because they're only looking at one form of data. So you have to look at everything.
Well, and I've seen powerful people in organizations try to use faceted search results, the ability to generate endless permutations, as a strategy. So the opposite of what Shari's saying, which is exclude all of those permutations and only let search engines see a nicely presented sort of, these are the primary ways we want people to, sort of canonical places to navigate from. I've seen powerful people go, no, we want all of those, we want 50 billion different kinds of pages because we'll have more pages in the index, and that'll be great. And it's not great.
It's not. There's something called an index count. So for web search engines, there's a maximum number of URLs that they will crawl. And they won't tell you what it is, but it's very heavily based on link development. So the more link development you have that's high quality, like Amazon and Apple, the more pages you can have in the search engine index. But if you're not them, and it's a logarithmic scale, it's not, one-to-one, And that's why you see the proliferation of these horrible link farms, because they're manufacturing millions upon millions of pages of duplicated content, just sorted differently. Start with 3, and you could add another facet and see how it goes. But usually I find that 3 works the best.
Sure. So the question was that polar bear book that was published in 2007, and my sense, I teach at the University of Michigan and used to use that book exclusively as the text for the class. And as we progress forward from there, not only is the world changing in ways that we understand that you can use that stuff forward. So it's mostly the tactical, I would say, the specific tactics of how are you going to make a sitemap, or how are you going to create some stable hierarchies. You know, a lot of the products and services we work on now, you can't generate a sitemap. It doesn't work that way. There aren't stable hierarchies involved. There are you know, complex data models. There are visualizations that you can make, but just sort of the world that that book spoke to and came from, so different from the way that CMSs work today, the way that services are cross-channel. So if you picked up that book and you were working on a website for some small nonprofit that you love, yeah, it's going to give you so much great information architectural thinking approaches. It'll be great. But that book was intended for large-scale websites. And that's what a lot of people didn't get, is that, oh, here's the book on information architecture. No. That book, at least in 1998, would be using a sledgehammer on a thumbtack if you're making a 3-page website. They were always talking about, this is information architecture for the World Wide Web for large-scale websites. And so to that end, you know, they talk about tagging a little bit in the 2007 edition. They talk about folksonomy a bit, but it really, a lot of the tactics don't apply anymore. A couple books that I have sort of swapped in. I've gone both forward and backward in time. I've gone backward into the work of Richard Saul-Wurman, one of the inventors of information architecture, and his work from the 60s and 70s has probably more tactical, like stuff you can do value for information architecture than the early 2000s Polar Bear book does. And then sort of going forward, a colleague of ours on the Institute board, the current president, Andrea Resmini, has a book called Pervasive Information Architecture, and that one is a good gap filler between 2007 and when that book was published in 2010.
And my two...
Oh, and I will also say Shari's search engine visibility book, I've always used that in an IA class, and that always obtains.
Thank you. I use, when I teach, I use search patterns, so the books I just showed you. And I do use ambient findability. Ambient findability is definitely more librarian type of book, but it's still fantastic. Lou Rosenfeld wrote a book called Search Analytics, and it is brilliant. And you can get, because think about it, people are already at your website. So where do they want to teleport? And is it a navigation failure? Is it a labeling failure? And really setting up your analytics, your search analytics, to learn that and just make a better website. Those are the two search books I absolutely love. Any other